Thank you so much for being with us on the program. Now, you have a very interesting story, which I want to get into in a bit. But looking at the magnitude of this conflict, it's unlike anything that we've ever seen before in recent time. Apart from wiping out Hamas, what's Israel's main aim here? Would they occupy more territory, given the scenes that we're seeing today, which reminds many of the Nakba?
Well, to answer your question, it's important to look at context, and the context is very rarely mentioned in the media. Israel is the product of the Zionist movement, and the plan of the Zionist movement was always to create an exclusively Jewish state on all of Palestine. In order to do that, you have to remove the non-Jewish indigenous people. That's the plan, and that's never actually changed. The Nakba was an attempt to make it happen, but back then Israel was unable to get rid of all the Palestinians, and the 750,000 people that were ethnically cleansed ended up in places like Gaza and around the Middle East. What you see now is nothing special in a way. It is a continuation of the same thing. I don't think the words settler colonialism are mentioned enough in the media. And so when your viewers, when people are watching this, they're trying to understand what's going on, but they don't understand it. There is an illusion, I think, the media are trying to create that Israel has promoted of symmetry between Israel and the Palestinian people. And there is no symmetry. There is no symmetry between a settler colonizer who is trying to remove the indigenous people and the colonizer and the indigenous people themselves. It's a complete imbalance of power. Israel is a settler colonialist state, and it has always worked consistently to complete its plan. I think that the attack by Hamas in Gaza was just a pretext to basically ethically cleanse Gaza. What you see now is not just a conflict. It's not something that's going to disappear. Israel will not stop until it gets rid of all the Palestinians. And I actually believe that once they finish with Gaza, they're going to come for the West Bank. And after that, probably for the Israeli citizens, the Palestinian citizens of Israel. And there are calls in the Israeli government to remove citizenship from them, which will make them stateless as well. Israel will not stop. And the world needs to understand. And the idea that a huge country like the United States enables this it's just inconceivable to me. It's awful.
I want to look at the Jewish community, because not everyone from the Jewish community supports the actions of the Israeli government. In fact, many are calling for the freedom of Palestinians, worried that if there is no solution to the conflict, there will be no peace in Israel.
There is no conflict and there will be no peace. What you're seeing is a settler colonialist program. As Dr. Ilan Pappé has always called it, he called it an incremental genocide. What you're seeing is an action of genocide. Israel wants to remove the Palestinian people. And that's its plan all along.
Talk to us a bit about your story and what led you to renounce your Israeli citizenship.
I was born and raised in Tel Aviv. I served in my 2 years in the military, as everybody else does. And I left Israel in 1991, and I went to Australia. And it wasn't until 10 years after I moved to Australia that I started to realize that I was brought up on a false narrative of our history. I was brought up to believe that we Israeli Jews were always the victims, that we were the good guys, that we never did anything wrong, and that the reason that the Arabs, and there was no word for Palestinians back when I was a child, but the reason that the Arabs were giving us a hard time is simply because they were anti-Semitic like everybody else. We were brought up to believe that Jews are never safe unless they live in an exclusively Jewish state, only for Jews and only surrounded by Jews. And it took me 10 years in Australia to finally realize that what I thought was true wasn't quite right. And I met Palestinians for the first time as equals in Australia, and members of citizens of other Arab countries as well, and realized they weren't actually my enemy. We were the bad guys in the story. And it was very hard at first to come to terms with it. In 2001, I renounced my Israeli citizenship, but even then, I don't think I quite understood the idea of settler colonialism, and that's in fact what we were, what the Israeli Jewish population was doing. But I did eventually, and I've been speaking out to the best of my ability ever since. I was a soldier in the Israeli army. I was a soldier during the Sabra and Shatila massacres. In an indirect way, I colluded with that. And I've always felt that it's my job to speak out as best I can.
You mentioned that you were brought up to believe that the Israelis were the victims in all of this. Talk to us a bit about that sort of upbringing and the propaganda that Israel has used to not only make Israelis believe that, but make the West believe that.
So when you grow up in Israel, it's a very insular kind of culture. You only hear one narrative. And the narrative is we are Jews, we were persecuted, which is correct, but it's true. And now that we're in Israel and want to have a place of our own to be safe, nobody's going to let us do that. When I was as young as 6 or 7 years old, and I was at school, they used to show us images from the Holocaust, really horrible images. You know, when Auschwitz was liberated, and there's these images of the children and the emaciated people in stripy pajamas and dead bodies piled up, horrific stuff. And the teachers would just say, "This could be you. This could be you. The only thing we are taught that the only thing that stands between you and another Holocaust is Israel, and therefore your whole life needs to be about defending Israel." And the thing is that that's what Israelis really believe. Despite all the evidence, despite the fact that there are more Jews living outside of Israel perfectly safely, Israeli Jews are brought up to believe that everybody's against them. I've been watching the Israeli news, and it's interesting that they are surprised that they get the support they get. They really do believe the world is all against them. I grew up on this. So that's it. It's a kind of a closed system, and Israel is deeply insular. What's going on in the news now is basically just one narrative that confirms and validates what Israelis are always being taught. You have to get out to understand and to open your mind to the fact that it actually doesn't fit the evidence.
It's ironic because we're seeing the actions that are being committed towards Palestinians. They were once committed to Israelis in history. Avigail Abarbanel, thank you so much for being with us here on TRT World and sharing that insight with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.